Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, January 18th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Arkansas, co-author of The Long Southern Strategy, How Chasing White Voters in the South Changed American Politics. We'll be talking to Angie Maxwell. First, Senate Democrats attempt to push a voting rights bill, but they will not shed the filibuster. As such, we're just going to get a show. The Pacific island of Tonga buried by an undersea volcanic eruption. The exact nature and amount of the damage we don't know, but it seems less than we had thought. New information on the gunman who held a Texas synagogue hostage and was shot by the FBI. Omicron seems to have peaked in New England. Now on to the rest of the country. Deaths and cases rise in nursing homes. Meanwhile, hospitals hit staffing shortages. Secretary of State Blinken visits Ukraine with a bipartisan team of senators as tensions in Russia mount. With Russia, I should say, mount. Shipments of U.S. government free COVID tests are going to take a week plus. So order in advance, folks. Prosecutors grant immunity to Matt Gaetz' ex-girlfriend. Presumably, she has information for his sex trafficking and obstruction investigations.
Whoa.
Newly released memos show extreme meddling with the census during the Trump administration. 60 Cubans put on trial for protesting. They face 30 years each. Meanwhile, detainees in an Arkansas jail sue over the jail having given them, unknowingly, ivermectin. And DirecTV drops One America News. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Joining me, as always, Emma Vigeland. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam. Didn't sound too excited about that, huh?
Who didn't?
You, about me joining you.
What are you talking
Joining
about?
me as always.
I didn't do that part.
Yeah, well,
I didn't do the...
might as well have.
Well, you know, I realized like today's actually sort of a Monday.
Yeah.
And
feels like one.
As soon as I look over to you on a Monday, I obviously think like, oh, she's all juiced from all the football she walked.
I am.
and then I
What'd you drop?
I don't know. I dropped something, but then I realized like the Patriots got destroyed, and that was a horrible game.
Yeah.
And so all of that happened in that one fleeting moment.
I made a good amount of money this weekend, so I'm pretty happy about it.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that those apps only came in like at the end of the season so that we'll have time to gear up.
I told you it would
for
turn
the
around
interventions.
for me. And I've been honestly on a heater with hockey betting. But that's a whole separate.
Well,
Topic.
I'm glad that those apps only came in like at the end of the season so that we'll have time to gear up. I told you it would turn around for me.
And I've been honestly on a heater with hockey betting. But that's a whole separate thing.
Separate for now. We'll see.
All right. Well,
we could talk about it later.
yeah. Maybe we should, actually. Human Resources might be in touch. Yesterday, of course, was Martin Luther King's birthday, or the day we celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday. And the Biden administration has tried to, obviously with good reason, associate that day with an attempt to reinstate parts of the Voting Rights Act and to expand voting rights, and an attempt to keep redistricting from becoming completely off the rails. That vote, I guess, is going to take place today, or is going to start. I have read about 14 different iterations of what the Democrats are supposedly could or can or will do to try and circumvent the filibuster. The bottom line is Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin refused to vote for a carve-out for the filibuster. I just want to remind you that the last time we had a carve-out to the filibuster took place, and now I'm older than many of you, so I remember this, took place in December of 2020.
Yeah, but Sinema must have not been in favor of that, right?
No, Sinema was, in fact, in favor of it. So wasn't Joe Manchin. It was a carve-out to raise the debt ceiling. Now, this took place, like I say, all the way a month ago. And so this filibuster is so sacrosanct to Kristen Sinema, to Joe Manchin, that they can't imagine in this era, and by this era I mean these three weeks, voting to do a carve out of the filibuster for any reason. So that's where we're at.
But luckily, they didn't have the gall to invoke Martin Luther King yesterday for any particular reason, right?
Oh my
just
God.
Kidding.
They all did.
They all did, even though the filibuster was explicitly something that MLK opposed.
In fact, here is a clip that has been making the rounds. It was on C-SPAN, tweeted out by Ari Berman. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., 1963, speaking to reporters at a press conference about that very topic.
If the president's program were incorporated, or such portions of it that would lend themselves to this, how would you feel about submitting this to a vote of the people of the United States who have never really had an opportunity to express themselves in this area?
Well, this would certainly be all right with me, because I think the vast majority of people in the United States would vote favorably for such a bill. I think the tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. They won't let the majority of senators vote. And certainly they wouldn't want the majority of people to vote, because they know they do not represent the majority of the American people. In fact, they represent in their own states a very small minority.
I mean, here's the thing that happens if Vice President Kamala Harris decides we're no longer going to listen to the advice of the parliamentarian, and we're not going to recognize the filibuster. We're going to vote to get rid of it, let's say. Now, I don't know if Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are on board with that. I don't know, frankly, even you even need actually to even have a vote to not listen to the parliamentarian. And just give them the opportunity to vote up or down on this bill. See where it lands with Manchin and Sinema. I'll tell you what happens after that, though. The filibuster, one of the more anti-democratic features of our Senate, aside from the fact that the way it's apportioned, the fact that 40 million people, more people voted for one set of 50 senators than the other set of 50 senators, the filibuster goes away. It goes away for the Democrats. It goes away for the Republicans. And the Republicans are more than likely to have control of the Senate, maybe coming up. And then people are going to be like, well, I wish the Democrats had the ability to filibuster. Filibuster what? They're voting for the tax cuts anyways.
That can all go through reconciliation.
That can go through reconciliation, things like tax cuts. What is the other Republican plan? If they want to pass these laws, let the American public understand the differences between these two parties.
But that's part of why they favor the filibuster, the many reasons that Democrats like Sinema and Manchin do. It cloaks the true nature of their leadership and of what they're doing in the Senate. It allows for this kind of separation and this mystique that favors the powerful.
Yeah, and it provides a cover for Sinema and Manchin, but frankly, the Republicans have a lot more need for a fig leaf.
Exactly.
And which is why, at the end of the day, I say let's just blow this thing up and blow it in the most egregious way possible, so that the Republicans have the exact same justification for not having a filibuster.
And look how long we've been fighting for against this filibuster. I mean, seriously. And it is racist in nature, and that also needs to be articulated as well.
Well, we're going to be talking in just a moment to Angie Maxwell, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Arkansas, author of The Long Southern Strategy, How Chasing White Voters in the South Changed American Politics. May have something to do with this. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget, we've got our live show in Boston. Got an email from Todd. I purchased 2 tickets for the January 16th show. And since I can't witness the stunning Boston spring weather for May 15th show, I'd like to donate the tickets. Do you ever happen to have a couple of people who've expressed interest? Thanks and love the show. If you are interested in tickets and you cannot afford them for whatever reason, and you're going to be in Boston on May 15th, you can email us at majorityreporters@gmail.com or head into the Discord. Maybe we can use that as a great place for people to meet up and exchange tickets if they want to do that. So check it out there. Also, don't forget, shop.majorityreportradio.com is where you can get your merch. And justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off that. And again, your support is what keeps this show rolling. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. All right, I want to welcome to the program Angie Maxwell, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Arkansas. She is also the co-author of The Long Southern Strategy, How Chasing White Voters in the South Changed American Politics. Angie, welcome to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Thank y'all for having me.
Of course.
Okay, let's start. I have 2 questions I want to ask you simultaneously, but I will hold off on that. And start with just let's go back to just what the equilibrium was between the parties as we get into coming out of the 1940s. We've gone through now 50, 60 years of Jim Crow at that point in this country, following Reconstruction. We had the radical Republicans who wanted to empower Black people, and actually there was also other progressive things they wanted to do. The empire struck back, as it were. Jim Crow laws, the Supreme Court helped quite a bit in that endeavor to allow more contraction of voting. And one of the dynamics that came out of that was that you had wealthy plantation owners, Southern aristocrats, were willing to essentially get rid of poor white voters if they could also get rid of Black voters at that time, essentially from the rolls. And so that was so here we are in the 40s. What starts to happen here?
Well, what starts to happen in the 40s is that the National Democratic Party starts shifting in ways that are very counter to the solidly Democratic South, right? The solidly white Democratic South. And so, for example, Truman, integrates the military. He gives a speech at the NAACP where he says, by all Americans, I mean all Americans, and starts pushing, baby steps in kind of progressive civil rights issues. And that absolutely freaks out the white Democrats that had reestablished their power, like you described. And so they walk out of the Democratic Convention in 48 and decide to run their own party, the Dixiecrats, thinking that, the Democrats can't win without them, right? And this will tell the National Party, you better get back in line. And Truman, of course, wins without them, barely. And so then they're in a kind of, partisan purgatory of sorts, these Southern white Democrats. The National Party is moving away from where they are, but they can't imagine joining the Republican Party, for which there's no infrastructure in the South at all. So in the 50s, walk into the 50s with, both parties wanting Eisenhower to run as their candidate with almost matching platforms on civil rights and a lot of other issues, no kind of real distinction. And that's when a developing conservative wing of the Republican Party, just a faction, not even the majority of the Republican Party, starts trying to, build a more conservative coalition. And that emerges into what becomes the Southern strategy, which I call the long Southern strategy.
All right. Well, yeah, that brings me up to the other question that I wanted to contemporaneously ask you that I couldn't. What is the difference between the short and the long Southern strategy? I mean, I think people have heard of the Southern strategy and perceive it as a way in which Nixon and through the 80s with Reagan, Atwater sort of, gave up the ghost as he was becoming a ghost, I guess, that there was like an attempt to rile racial animus or to exploit it, I guess, electorally. What do you mean by the long Southern strategy?
Well, for me, I call it the short Southern strategy, not because it's inaccurate, but just because I feel like it's an incomplete kind of arc. Most people just think of Nixon and Goldwater. You're already bringing in Reagan, which is an advancement we've made in kind of the way we think about it. But I think it goes even further, and it's on more issues than just race. So when we look at, when we tell the story about how Nixon, wins over some of these, Southern Democrats or wins enough, we kind of go, okay, Republican Party decided to exploit this white racial angst, and boom, the South goes red. Except the South goes completely blue, except for Virginia, back to Jimmy Carter. And then it goes red again to Reagan. And then it's 5 Southern states swing back to Clinton, and more were leaning that way. And then Bush. And so I just kind of wanted to see a more thorough sketching out of what that was. And the real linchpin was looking at the Equal Rights Amendment for women. Because we'd done this, research on the racial issues, and we kind of talked about religion and the GOP's embrace of evangelicals, but there's a bridge between them. And when you look at 1980, Reagan picks up Southern white women in droves because of his decision to drop the Equal Rights Amendment. They polled it, they figured it out, and the data backs it up. And that actually was another part of this kind of Southern strategy. It was exploiting the racial angst, but also the angst about changing gender roles and what that was going to do to life and the family, on top of civil rights changes. I mean, particularly in the South, if you remember, because African Americans have been kept from, opportunities to advance higher, their degrees and to get job experience and management and so on. It was actually women going into the workplace after, the Civil Rights Act of 64 that was happening at a much faster rate because you had women with these degrees and experience. So the gender dynamic was really changing your personal life, like maybe your family or your office, in ways that, integration took a lot longer, right? And then the GOP actually pulled on that and played to that. And that became a bridge building this connection with the anti-feminists who were the first to use that banner, family values, was a way that really kind of introduced the GOP to the evangelicals at a different level. So it's kind of the bridge there. So I see that as, just like we talk about the long civil rights movement, the backlash has been longer and more complex to me.
I was excited to read about that, about specifically that aspect in your book, because from my perspective, my theory about how you had people who went from Obama to Trump was more or less, I was okay with the black guy, but I'm not going to have two non-normal presidents in a row. That the idea of a female president, I think from people, people of, from our perspective can see racism and sexism as different animals, but in fact, to the racist, sexist, it is just somebody who doesn't look like me.
Both counts, you're right, because on one hand, we do find people who express like racial resentment, right, and wouldn't vote for Obama because of it, who actually don't express what we measure as modern sexism, which is not believing that a woman can't do the job. It's resenting a woman that wants to, or distrusting a woman that wants to. It's just feeling uncomfortable with that, which women can also feel, by the way. High numbers of particularly Southern white women express high levels of modern sexism, right? This support for traditional gender roles. And people can hold both of those ideas, racial resentment, modern sexism, and people can have one or the other. And a lot of the people we saw flip from Obama to Clinton, they didn't have a problem with racial resentment, but they absolutely live in a traditional gendered household, right? Or like you said, they were a little bit uncomfortable with both, right? And the combination of two in a row, right? Both of those things are true.
All right, so I want to get to the third sort of leg of this stool, but before we do, this is a good time to just sort of talk about your methodology, because you're making these statements. We should say you did a lot of data mining here. That's what you do. So tell us what you did here and
Sure.
why. What the data that you compiled was unique in the context of what we've seen in the past in terms of the way that political scientists have approached this stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. I'll be as straightforward as I can about it, but most national polls and the ones academics use, the gold standard out of University of Michigan, it's been running since the 50s, has really small samples of the South, really small. And what Southerners they do have, it's often African Americans, because they are trying to get a, national sample. And for, generations, the population density was in the South, right? And so realizing that, going back to the raw numbers and all those data sets, we're like, we have to poll a big national poll with an oversample of the South. We've got to have real numbers in the South to be able to look at all this nuance and be able to compare it to the rest of the country.
But why is that gold standard poll do that? Why does it?
That's a great question. It's because they're trying to do is take a national snapshot. That's it. And if they get enough in the South, then they're not going to have enough in the West, and they're not going to have enough here, because it's really expensive to do these deep dive national surveys. They're not who would you vote for, this or this. They're deep, long, extensive work. So it wasn't their job to do. They were trying to take a national snapshot. And we can do a lot of stuff with weighting and statistics, and try to model some things. But when the South was in the middle of a realignment from, blue to red, when who was voting was changing dramatically, right? After the Voting Rights Act, right? Then not having a good, solid, even an oversample of that region that you can compare to the rest of the country, it's just something we haven't had. And so that's what we did.
We should say the importance of that is that's where the story was. right? I mean, that's where all the change was happening in the country. Everything else was sort of moving on in a fairly predictable trajectory. Urban centers are getting more, democratic. I mean, and maybe rural areas, but the South is where there was real dynamism in terms of how people are changing their voting patterns and what
that's exactly right.
Okay.
And so it was crucial. We also, the other thing we did is we don't just look at geographic South. We also asked, do you identify as Southern? Because we find that the South is a, imagined space and a geographic space. Now, political scientists don't usually care about that imagined space because you don't vote where you imagine, to be, but identity issues matter in ways that I still think political scientists are teasing out, myself included. And so we were able to compare geographic to Southern identity and that to the national, picture and the non-South. And that is what really kind of opened up some interesting complexity.
So if we're backing up to the origin of this change really in the 1940s and the beginning of the long Southern strategy, as you say, I think, do you mind fleshing out a little bit for us why Truman or why the Democratic Party felt that it was in their interest to even make this shift? Because it was the right thing to do, but the cynical part of me is, well, why was there a desire to even move away from having this voting bloc of racist Southern whites?
You mean why the National Party decided to go in that direction? It's a great question. It's part of it has to do with the New Deal coalition that kind of Truman inherited, which included, African Americans who could vote, right, with labor, with white Southerners who were traditionally Democrats. So that in that crisis moment, what FDR put together was a bunch of strange bedfellows, right? But it changed kind of the composition of the Democratic Party to a degree. And Truman, very kind of moved by the, Double V campaign, which was the early civil rights movement to say victory at home and victory abroad. Like, we're not going to fight in this military and save the world from Nazism and live under Jim Crow. And Truman was very, convinced by that. And so said, what can I do federally? Well, I can desegregate the military after we won this, war. And so some of it was because that was part of his base now, post that New Deal coalition. So it wasn't crazy. It was just picking one part of the party kind of over the other, to a degree, and kind of hoping change was kind of hearts and minds are kind of changing too. But Southern whites, Democrats, for the most part, weren't willing to go there.
Okay, so let's go to the third, tent pole of this long Southern strategy, and it was, it's interesting that you make the point that for those Dixiecrats starting in the 1940s and in the 50s, well into the 60s, there is no Republican infrastructure in the South, and there's no party infrastructure, and there's no institution, there's no way of organizing people. The Democrats at that point had some structure, but they also had unions, which was a big a boon to them. We should say, but not in the South.
But not in the South. That's right. Not in the South. That's exactly right.
And so it is. We get this. There's this response to this broad emancipation, both in terms of race and in terms of gender, and the backlash that comes in there. The third missing piece that comes in the 70s is religion. And particularly Southern Baptists, you write. Mm-hmm. And with that comes sort of almost like an umbrella, for all of this ideology to roll under, and an infrastructure.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you're so smart to mention the infrastructure part, because when you don't have unions, the biggest institutions in the South are churches, right? So in 1979, the Southern Baptist Convention, there was a fundamentalist takeover. Literally two guys, hatched a plan to say, we don't like how the Baptists are kind of being moderate on some of these changing social issues. And we want a fundamentalist in charge. And if we can campaign and maneuver at the convention, like they had walkie-talkies and stuff, which nobody had done before, we can get our guy, in charge. And then over a decade, that person appoints so many people. Like there's a committee on committees, which sounds like a nightmare to me, but you point somebody to that and they appoint people. And over a decade, they transform the Southern Baptist Convention and they, recodify this, doctrine of wifely submission. Women must submit to their husbands. And they purge, women from seminary. No more women in seminary. And they build an alliance with the Republican Party. At first, they kind of go to, in early efforts, they had thought maybe they could work with Jimmy Carter, right? But Jimmy Carter didn't do anything that they wanted him to do. So then they kind of built an alliance with Reagan, but they feel like Reagan paid lip service. Then they decide to run their own person. And that didn't work out. And so slowly over time, they started operating like politicos, right? It doesn't matter who the person is. Doesn't matter their background. Doesn't matter if they're Mormon or divorced 3 times. It matters if they deliver. We look at evangelicals, white evangelicals, particularly in the South, and we think, well, this is so hypocritical, right? These moral values. But that's because we are looking at them as if that's how they're voting, right? They're voting for who will deliver the things they want, no matter what package it is in. So we even polled asking people, if they thought Donald Trump was a Christian. This was back in 2016. They don't, but they voted for him. Because they know he's going to deliver the things that they want.
God
and they
works
promise.
in mysterious ways. I
And
guess.
it's mysterious vessels as well.
Let me just back up a little bit in terms of the development of this, and then I want to get into sort of, some of those things that you found in the polling. But one thing I learned from your book, from 1980 to 2000, Southern Baptist ministers, in 1980, 27% of them self-identified as members of the Republican Party. By 2000, 85% did. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. I mean,
that's the story.
That's
right?
it right there. And so now my understanding is, and abortion plays into this, but also, the element of gender, equality, or just the idea of some type of women's liberation, I guess, was the terminology at that time, at least coming out of the 60s. Bob Jones University, under and Jimmy Carter, who was a reborn Christian, and like you said, there was some sense that maybe he would be able to motivate them. But at that time, my understanding was, in the early 70s, the attitude was, leave unto Caesar that is what is Caesar's, and we don't get political. Bob Jones University was going to have its tax status revoked because it would not allow for a black person to marry a white person. And under, the Civil Rights Act, you're not going to get federal funding. You're not going to get tax deduction. They knew that was not going to fly in terms of a organizing issue. So they adopted abortion, which of course is really in many respects an extension of just sort of reestablishing the patriarchy. You don't want women to have control over their own bodies and the ability to determine their fate.
You have to remember how many Southern white women supported that, right? So they get organized by the anti-feminist movement, right? Phyllis Schlafly works with Lottie Beth Hobbs of the SBC, of the Southern Baptist Convention, to help organize Southern white women to kill the ERA in their respective states, because it was just a few states, shy of ratification. And this galvanized these women. They got them to go to the, convention meetings and to nominate people for their, counter convention they were having. It was a whole, it was the politicizing issue for a whole generation of a lot of Southern white women who also happened to be religious women, right? and saying that the roles that they chose for themselves to be at home, to support their spouse, and there is nothing wrong with that, but it portrayed feminism as not a choice. You know, the anti-feminists told these women, we have these documents, that they would have to work, that they would have to put their babies in government daycare, that if their husband divorced them, there'd be no child support. They told them all these things that terrified these women, honestly, because there wasn't an infrastructure for daycare and working and all of this. I mean, that was an overwhelming, you know, kind of feeling. And so they got on church buses and they marched and they organized to kill the ERA. And when you add in abortion and frame it as someone just choosing not to be a mother, right? They took that personally because that is the role that they play and they see as most important. And so you're right, as the two issues kind of collided and you add in also like prayer in schools, right? It became this entire vision of kind of a Christian nationalist. Christians are under attack, you know, we have to protect them. And it was, I'm not saying white Southern men weren't helping with it, but Southern white women are where the shift happens. They're the thing you go, like we talk about suburban women now, they're the thing you go, whoa, okay, that's the shift, right? And we don't write about them. We don't study them. There's no research on them. And it's so critical because, and I say this in this book, but in 2016, when everybody was saying Hillary Clinton lost white women, she actually won white women outside of the South by 4 points. She lost them in the South by 30. And we don't talk about that difference when they say suburban women are leaving outside of the South, right? You look at 2018 and everyone said, look at all these amazing women that won in the midterms, not in the South, right? And there's a cultural reason for that has to do with, you know, how gender is perceived by women and men and the choices they make and some of those done. I know it has to do with party ID too, of course, but it's more than that.
But right? Now you say they happened to be Christian, but isn't that relationship that part of their Christian ID? And you mentioned, you know, people refer to themselves as being Southern without necessarily living in what we consider the South. But there's also data that shows that people consider themselves to be evangelistic Christians without really going to church, and and practicing in a manner that would identify them. Now, I mean, I can appreciate that. I don't go to the temple very often. I consider myself a Jew, but it isn't as it doesn't. That ID does not dictate the way I move through the world, I don't think, in the way that it seems that people identify as evangelical, and therefore women have a specific role, men have a specific role, the government has a specific role, race.
That's absolutely right.
Located in that too, right? I mean, this all comes together. It's
not based on theology, right? And evangelical used to be, I mean, very much like politics is a worldly concern. That is not a concern we get involved in, right? There was a little bit about communism. There was a little fear about communism in the 40s and 50s, but stayed out of it. And then it becomes, as there's social changes, particularly not as much with race, but with women, this threatened the whole kind of power dynamic in a lot of these. And I mean, this is where you bridge between Catholics and Southern Baptists, right? This is the issue that built this coalition, is on these changing kind of gender roles. And it felt like a real shift and a real threat in a way that hits your everyday life, right? Now, if there's women in your workplace and it had been kind of an old boys club, or if you're a woman and a couple of your friends are going to work and then that's making you feel like, are you not doing enough? And what should you do? And it just really changed the dynamics, and particularly in the South, where it had been so traditional. And the churches said, this is going to affect church and God is against it. And they started codifying that, more strictly, and pushing back against it. And that merges very easily into, the issues related to abortion.
But something that doesn't, I think, mesh as easily that they did embrace, though, is the U.S. militarism and kind of intervention abroad, which we're seeing more acutely now, specifically if it's a Muslim country or something like that.
Such a great point.
How did they, thank you, how did they integrate that? Because that's very helpful for certain powerful actors.
Oh, you're right. And it's similar to what Sam said. It becomes, at that point, when it gets politicized, these attitudes about traditional gender roles and abortion stuff, it becomes an identity, right? And it becomes a group that feels like they are under attack, right? Even though they're not. We're still a predominantly Christian nation, right? I mean, overwhelmingly. But that it is any minute now, the sense of urgency and crisis. And so then that starts pushing, instead of separation of church and state, like the Southern Baptists kind of fire their lobbyists who are always just making sure they had the free exercise, and instead hire a whole group of lobbyists that are pushing for establishment of religion, right? So that's when we start seeing, don't separate church and state. We want Christian nationalists. And that has gone into a whole other place when we start getting the axis of evils language from George W. and to this being a foreign policy kind of vision also. And that is a post 9/11 kind of layer onto this already kind of bent towards Christian nationalism, as if you're in this kind of group that identifies this way. And of course, all of the misinformation we didn't used to have this many people who even knew about certain foreign policy conflicts, right? So when you've got that identity group and you've got that infrastructure of the church system, and you can access them with information through all these platforms, we're really seeing that aspect of it, tick upward fast.
So can you just walk us through in terms of a time, because you talk about the myth of the gender gap, and what that was not so much that women were flocking to the Democratic Party, but rather that white men were flocking to the Republican Party. Is that basically, do I have that right?
Kind of. I mean, so in 1980s, the first time we used the phrase gender gap, and what it technically meant in 1980 was it was just for the Democratic Party, and it was the percentage of women who voted for Carter in 1980 for re-election minus the percent of men that voted for Carter. And why some feminists really push that is to say, hey, look, women are a bigger base for you, Carter, you got to take us seriously, because they were terrified that the ERA was going to fail and not get extended. I mean, they're really trying to show their importance. It really gets conflated in the media because more women vote for Carter than men vote for Carter, and more women voted overall than men in the election. However, nobody voted for Carter, right? More people voted for Reagan overall. Does that make sense? So yes, within who voted for Carter, but the majority of women voted for Reagan and the majority of men voted for Reagan. And so we kind of conflate the women's vote, right? Like how women voted, with the gender gap, which is just the difference between men and women. And then we try to explain why. Why did more women vote for Carter than men? Well, because they dropped the ERA from their platform in 1980. The Republicans did, after having it for so many years, right? And so there were feminists from the Republican Party that moved to the Democratic Party, and there were men and Southern white women that moved to the Republican Party, and there were African-American women growing in numbers voting that were moving to the Democratic Party too, but it was off, right? People used to say Reagan had a problem with women and getting votes. So his organization polled 40,000 American women to the tune of like $100,000. And they divided them into 64 categories. They called them Nancy's, Helen's, Betty's, whatever. They were trying to understand women in America. And they realized that if they pushed kind of traditional gender roles and Marlboro Man, you know, and kind of a traditional first lady, that they win those women they needed to win, right? They lose other ones, but they would win the ones they needed to win in the states they needed to win for an electoral college victory. So that's the other piece of this Southern strategy that's so important, is just to remember the map, right? Republicans looking, it's not just ideology. They're looking at a map going, how do we ever win the presidency? If there's this block, we have to break this up, right? What are some issues that we could maybe pull some voters on? The goal was just to pull a few states at first, right? Because the South had been such a block, right? And so that is why they kind of started pushing and looking at the South, trying to figure out how to appeal there and to constantly appeal there, you know? And so that is why it affects the rest of the country, because ultimately the Republican Party rebranded itself. It nationalized this kind of these aspects of Southern white identity. It rebranded itself that way and conservatism that way, and that affects the whole country.
And so was there an increase in the Republican women's vote along these lines, or was it just simply static enough with the addition of men who had maybe abandoned the Democratic Party?
No, Southern white women moved. They moved, and they did move. And there was data that was released that like the week after the election, and there was polling that was actually done on why they moved. And it was, yes, right after 1980. They moved for Reagan because of the equal rights, because the Republican Party dropped the Equal Rights Amendment. That's why. Literally, they asked that question. Literally, they asked the question, and it's why they moved.
And that's why I just want to reiterate this. So when the Republicans dropped the ERA, they got a substantial, I mean, how would you characterize the size of the move of white women to the Republican Party?
Overall, within the vote, when I'm thinking about how many Southern white women actually vote, it's probably an 8 to 10 point move.
That's massive.
It is massive. It's massive.
Is that the story that
it's the story we don't tell. It's the story we don't tell.
Okay. And is that the story that we're operating under? I mean, so what happened? So you have from Reagan, you have this sort of like back and forth a little bit. Now, Bill Clinton, he only wins with 45% of the vote. Maybe it was like 43% or 44%, but he's a Southern governor. And one of the big move that they make with Hillary Clinton over the course of that campaign is she goes from basically saying, you know, I'm not going to stand by my man in the kitchen, more or less, to like, I'm baking cookies by the end of it. Like I think they changed their hairdo. They basically realized at one point, like, oh, we got to appeal to these. We've got to portray you as a Southern woman here. Well,
some of that was done when she was first lady in Arkansas specifically. And some of those changes were because they were trying to reform education and they couldn't get, you know, people to listen unless someone shows up in a way that they understand and recognize, right? So some of it was very strategic because there were policy initiatives that they cared that much about trying, you know, to pass, that they were like, we'll meet you where you are, right? It's always framed kind of like it was deceit, but a lot of it was, I'm going to meet you where you are kind of in the early days and recognizing, you know, fish out of water.
But I guess my point is that what Clinton represented, aside from his corporatism and the way that the Democratic Party moved to the right during that time, but in terms of appealing to the cohort that we're talking about, Southern white women, that was sort of an anomaly, and slowed the role and hid, to some extent, obscured what was happening.
This is very true. It's because he was one of them. I mean, this is why the short Southern strategy is so incomplete. I mean, can you imagine a Southern Democrat running right now, and all of a sudden, some Southern Republicans are like, well, but they're from the South. No, they won't. They won't. It's that entrenched now. It wasn't then. The story is longer. So they would vote for Reagan, but they hadn't changed their party ID, right? Or they still called themselves conservative, or they hadn't changed their party ID because Democrats are still in charge in their state.
Right.
Right. And they can't operate, they're teetering between this national identity and this state identity. And, the Democratic brand wasn't ruined, right? To these Southerners, they weren't done with it. So they're able to kind of go back, and Clinton plays it nicely, picks up, 4 or 5 Southern states. He was also a member of the Southern Baptist Church, and so he kind of skates a little bit of line. It just picks up enough, right?
And then the aughts, in following 9/11, that all gets basically blown up. I also heard a stat, and I think it was from, I can't remember which of those books. I think it was the one by Sides. I'm not quite sure, that 50% of non-college whites prior to Obama thought the Republican Party was still more pro, was more pro, I guess, black people than the Democrats. And that Obama was the final sort of like, I guess, wake-up call for these people. That there was just not, there was still the vestige of the Democrats being more hostile to black people than the Republicans. And
that's the history for most,
right.
For most people. I mean, the state I'm in, Arkansas, doesn't flip red till 2012. This is not old kind of history. And part of, what's sometimes hard for people to understand is in some of these homogenous kind of enclaves within the South, the idea that you'd have a black president, I mean, they just didn't believe that was possible. They didn't even take it seriously, over a military guy like John McCain. They didn't even take it seriously. So it was an alarm. It was a shock to see. And, anybody else that's watching it and paying attention, is like, well, yeah, it's definitely leaning Obama's way, right? But it did not feel that way, to some of these folks who've never seen, a black political leader at any level. Just like when the Supreme Court comes down and rules in favor of gay marriage and legalizes it, that shocked, people that live under what I call these kind of sacred canopies, where a lot of other outside ideas just kind of don't get in. And so it seems like that is fringe, right? And then when it happens at the national level, all of a sudden, it's very jarring. And we saw a huge backlash for people that kind of live in those really like-minded, kind of homogenous communities, which there are many pockets, particularly in rural places, in the South, where the ideas just don't get in.
And is that backlash in terms of the people who are voting, like in terms of the extra people who are showing up? Is that Southern women, or is that
definitely we've seen Southern women's voting go continue to go up, but the voter turnout in the South, unless it's in a competitive state, is still really bad, right? I think Arkansas was 50th in 2016. You're going to see a high turnout in Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, because you got competition. When you have one party control, that's just, political science kind of 101. It just doesn't kind of drive turnout. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the identity, the whole brand, this whole new brand of kind of the Republican Party that it, created in order to break up this Southern Democratic bloc, And by the way, and I want to say this, it's important, with each of these kind of turns the Republican Party took on race, on gender roles, on religion, There were Republicans that absolutely thought it was a terrible idea and hated it. There was factions in the party going, this is a disaster. We don't want to do this. And there were candidates that wouldn't do it. John McCain wouldn't play that card very hard. Neither did Bob Dole, right? Gerald Ford wouldn't. Problem is they all lost, right? And Mitt Romney. And so playing to that kind of new Southern base on those that reaches people all over the country, on those kind of three key issues, you know, that accounts for kind of 95% of Trump's, you know, white vote is being kind of a Christian nationalist or expressing racial resentment or modern sexism. And that's from what people say about themselves. Questions they answer about themselves voluntarily.
And,
right?
and would you say these are polls that you took in 2012, 2011?
2010, 2012, 2016. Mm-hmm.
And if I was to go back and read Kevin Phillips's The Emerging Republican Majority, was that basically the blueprint? Or I think he would have argued
It's the blueprint on the racial part. And that's another important thing to mention is that, you know, when I say the long Southern strategy, there's no one architect that like drafted this whole thing, right? It starts on the racial issue, but then they realize and the Republicans are better at it than Democrats. Let's figure out where the cultural kind of cleavages are, like what gets inside people. And they pay attention to that before they're even horse race polling people. That's how they figure out they're getting these church, you know, Southern white church women on buses to go follow Schlapp. Like, what is this, right? They're getting organized. Like, we got to talk to that group. You know, they kind of figure that out. And so, but Kevin Phillips is the one that starts it by saying, these people are going to be mad as civil rights changes are enacted and it's happening in their, you know, kind of daily lives. And the National Party has really, Democratic Party has sealed its fate in supporting that. And there's about to be this huge, you know, kind of gap. And if we go build something there, right?
And Phillips famously said, like, you know, find out who they hate. And
that's right. That's the us versus them. They also learned that from George Wallace. I mean, George Wallace was notorious as the segregationist governor of Alabama who ran 3 times for the presidency. He called it, you know, it's described about Wallace as positive polarization. So if you can't make people like you, you say, yeah, but you want to be one of those people, right? Are you for us or are you against us? So for Wallace, you know, he's kind of a slimy guy. Some people were just like, eh. But he said, you want to be one of these pinhead liberal intellectual, you know, hippie, long-haired, you know, not patriotic. And people are like, well, I'm definitely not that. So I guess I'm with Wallace. Like right. The us versus them, you know, you're either on this side or you're on this side, and a middle that cannot hold. And it's identity-based. Identity based.
And this identity thing, we didn't get into the grand bargain. I skipped over that, but the grand bargain was essentially, we're going to immiserate you economically, poor white guy. But the good news is you're not going to be as bad as the poor black guy. And,
that's right.
And that was the grand bargain that Lillian Smith wrote about in those the first half of the 20th century.
That's right. I mean, this is how, I mean, whenever you see a power dynamic where the group that controls things in the South is such a small group, right? Such a small group. And yet, even in the Civil War, they get all of these people to march to their death who don't even own slaves for the idea that at least they aren't one, right? It's like poor white Southerners have long been conditioned to kind of forfeit a personal battle, you know, in the service of winning an imagined war, from which they do not benefit. And that continues, you know, saying you're with us, you're one of us, has a currency to it of some sort that's kind of intangible, but makes people feel good. And they will value that over an economic interest that honestly, they never see changing. That's the other part we miss.
Right.
They don't look at government and think it's going to make a damn bit of difference, right? If you got a $10,000 deductible on that new healthcare plan, it might as well be 10 million, right? And so then they kind of give up on that. And what feels good is feeling like you're part of something, right? And kind of punching at the other guy. You know, that is something that is they can feel, see, hear, and feel like they belong to, and punch back with a little bit of their frustration. When they don't see government programs that are going to do anything. So is that, to the extent that you've seen in the enormous amount of data you've done with this in terms of women in the South and the South in general, because it's increasingly clear that Democrats, at least on a national level, are not going to be able to maintain any type of like governing majority under the way that we elect people now, frankly, unless they start to chip away at elements in the South. Right. And so is the only, that last part that you just mentioned, the idea that the Southerners you looked at in this data do not believe that it's going to make a difference to them on an economic level about the government. The only thing they see a difference is like, you know, who's going to get the goodies, and I want it to still be people like me, essentially. Is the only way to make inroads in there to change their perspective on whether government's ultimately going to be able to deliver to them, which you would need to do? Like, it's a chicken and egg thing on some level. Deliverables are a critical piece of it. The other piece of it is knowing what those people value. You know, my first book before this one's on the Southern inferiority complex. I'm gonna tell you right now, if you went to Southern white women, particularly those who are moms, and you said, you know, you kept schools running, you keep schools running, you volunteer, you do all this stuff that we don't pay you anything to do, you keep schools going, and you did so much work if you were closed and you were working with kids with virtual schooling. You know, we need to let you know, people who volunteer at these schools and fill all these jobs have an earned tax credit. Guess what? Those women are like, wow, I'm valued. I can contribute to my family in some way.
They just got that. I mean, it just ended.
But I mean, for the women, particularly who volunteer kind of at the schools, I mean, that's why they're going after the school boards with the anti-CRT and all of that, is because those women that are often stay at home, perhaps more affluent, and who have been ones that didn't vote, didn't really participate, right? And, you know, making them feel attacked will drive them to the polls, right? Making them feel valued and respected is a way to perhaps, you know, entice them in a different direction.
And I guess your question is like, how do you do that when the framing of what's going on is done much better by the Republicans? I mean, those women did in fact get an extra $300 per kid over the past 6 months or whatever it was, 8 months. It's now expired. And there was an expanded, but it wasn't, nobody was saying like, we're going to get you this because you did. And
they weren't saying it because we're going to get you this because so many of you did so much labor during this pandemic. You got your parents' shots. You got your, you know, you worked on your kids' school stuff with them. You volunteered at school. You've been under, you know, caregivers like this have been, you know, left out of the conversation. They didn't tell them why. And it matters. And
that's not necessarily negated by going to other groups of people and saying the same thing, as long as you say it. I mean, it's just sort of, I guess, like, I don't know, how do you make people around the office feel appreciated? There's your
you'd be amazed how important it is. How important it is. I mean, what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia, she found the psychological thing. I mean, this is my opinion. She found the psychological thing that was holding Black voters from, you know, back from participating, which is they're going to show up and they're going to have done something wrong and somebody's going to humiliate them, or it's not going to be safe, or they're going to be turned away, and they're going to be so angry that they're not going to be able to handle that emotional constraint. And she said, here's the number. They mess with you, you call us. We have your back. We will make sure you do it right. We will help you if somebody mistreats you. It is going to count this time. We will not let it not. And and of course they registered lots of people too, but it was the psychological that says, I'm checking out of voting because I've been treated so badly historically, and I just don't want to feel that way again, right? and it doesn't matter. My vote, it not going to change anything. And going in and saying, you know, we're not going to let anybody do that to you. It's going to be a fulfilling experience that goes well. And if we got to stand in line, we're going to stand in line. We are not. It's that, you know, that's what she figured out. And that's what those organizations did, is they made people feel empowered. You know, it's not always just the policy. It's the message.
And so is the answer as to like how you start to make inroads in places like North Carolina, in Georgia, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's one or two other states where you could start to make some inroads, maybe Texas, maybe Florida, although Florida seems to be long gone at this point. There is no one...
There's no one size fits all.
Okay, it's really just got to be, people have to be, and part of the problem is the Democratic Party now finds itself without any infrastructure in most of these states, and so they don't have people there.
And it's worse because of the Voting Rights Act, because we haven't passed that. Like in Arkansas, you know, the work that has gone in for 10 years to where in 2020, but an African-American woman who pulled over 40% in a congressional district, pulled in a ton of money and got really close, and probably would have been even closer if it weren't for all the COVID voting stuff and the absentee ballot mess and all of that. And they just split Little Rock into 3 separate congressional districts. There are only 4 in the state. There are only 4. And now Little Rock's carved into 3. Now, is that going to change the outcome? No, it was red in before and it's going to be red again. But what it did is it just erased all of those years of building to getting to a place, right? That is the problem. It's not just what's going to happen in 2022. It's all of that erasure. All those people have been working to build that infrastructure, right? That is what I am concerned about. And I don't think people realize that we're about to have the first election cycle in half a century in which the districts have been drawn without any protection.
Without any voting rights protection.
Any protection.
Right.
Yep.
Let's see. Looking
but
through.
we can't change what we don't acknowledge. Like, we have to recognize what it is. And we have to realize how important it is. And people have to understand the role the South plays nationally, right? Republican primaries, because the Republican National Convention gives bonus delegates to the states that went red in the last election cycle. And because most Southern states are winner take all or winner take most in the Republican primaries, and because a lot of them hold it early, right, in the calendar, the South's influence on that nomination is way larger than its actual size and scope, right? It's over kind of represented. Who they want will be the nominee. On the Democratic side, because those Southern primaries are early, right? And because even though those states are not going to go blue in a general, they are often pragmatists in the sense that, you know, Southern Democrats they did not go for Bernie, right? And it's not necessarily because they don't think Medicare for all is great. They think it's just pie in the sky. They live in a world, in a state, we're in a red state, where that's just inconceivable. That is such a bridge too far. Like, they're barely being able to expand Medicaid, right? So they end up, it's not that they are moderates, they're pragmatists, right? They are looking for that balance because they're blue in a red state, in such a red state.
So does that
so it has an influence on who, if you have a crowded field, has an influence on who gets nominated.
And does that have, and we should say, there was a similar dynamic with Obama. Black voters did not believe that Obama could win. And it wasn't until he won Iowa that all of a sudden the polls just dramatically shifted because they just thought it was not possible. But does that mean that there is a feedback loop that comes from front-loading the Democratic primaries that inhibits the ability of the Democratic Party to end up having a coalition that will end up providing the material benefits back to the people that could maybe shift their...
Yes, the feedback loop is a huge problem, and Democrats not recognizing that most people, I think it's 38 states, are under one-party government right now, 38. It's either all red or all blue in your state for your governor and state legislatures, right? If you are blue living in a red state, it just changes. It's the feedback loop, but it changes what you kind of think is possible. And a candidate explaining what can be done at the federal level that might not be able to be done in your state, that kind of messaging never happens in ways that it should happen. You know, you may not have to say that same thing out in California because you've got a good, strong coalition and maybe you can push it even farther. And that's wonderful. But, you know, moderate Democrats that, you know, get beat up by progressives on the left aren't always in disagreement with the goal. They're just all the way over here at the starting line, you know, and they really have seen, you know, the kind of Republican state leadership carve away at every possible, you know, we're going to sue against federal mandates on vaccines, our state, you know, they just see them get in the way all the time. So they don't quite believe sometimes that kind of dream. It's not sold to them in a way that here's the 3 things we can do your state can't touch, right? We can do this, this, this. Here's what we can work with your state on. We might be able to find a way here, you know, and just recognize that that there's a very big difference between a blue living in a blue state and a blue living in a red state. So and tailoring that message is critical, and Democrats don't do it.
Arguing to blue voters in a red state that you guys may need to do rear guard stuff here, but we on a national level can circumvent this. And that's right. What I'm promising you, so that you're not having to pull back on what you're offering, but you're addressing their skepticism on your ability to do it. And so you're showing them exactly how. You're showing them exactly how you're going. And you can say, it's okay if, you know, blue voters in California want to go this far. That's fine. We will help them do that at their state level. We will help them with this because they're already here. We know you guys don't even have this. Right. You don't even have, you know, you have no unions. You have no, you know, maternity and paternity leave. I mean, so we're going to help you there. Right. And here's how we can do it. And just letting, you know, recognizing, I guess, where kind of people come from. Just because people are, you know, more moderate in terms of who they vote for doesn't mean they don't have progressive dreams. That's not their reality, you know, and so they're trying to take one step at a time. Angie Maxwell, Associate Professor of Political Science at University of Arkansas. The book is The Long Southern Strategy, How Chasing White Voters in the South Changed American Politics. You co-wrote that with Todd G. Shields. Thanks so much for your time today. It's fascinating stuff, and hope to talk to you again, maybe as we get closer to these midterms. Really appreciate it. Thank y'all so much.
Thanks so much.
Really appreciate it.
Oh, sorry. Matt hung up on our guest. That's a fine how do you do.
Sorry, Angie.
Yeah.
But that was excellent.
Looks like Matt did not learn the lesson about making people feel like they're appreciangie
tailoring one's messaging, but they're tailoring.
Just want to make that clear. That if Angie Maxwell comes from Michigan, that doesn't happen. Comes from the Northeast, that doesn't happen. Pacific Northwest, but Arkansas.
Yeah.
Folks, we're going to head into the fun half. I wish I could say well, the good news is the Democratic Party is actually doing X, Y, Z that would address that. And no, they're not.
I mean, they won't even fund. That's something else we could have gotten into it with her about. There's barely any infrastructure or funding for Democratic Party resources in red states.
Exactly. If only Howard Dean had been given the opportunity for this 50-state strategy. But
yeah, well, I mean, the Democratic Party in North Dakota acts resentful that they even have to run a Senate candidate. The last time they ran somebody, just some old guy I'd never heard of, he's like, I guess I'll run. The party asked me to, and he got washed by a Republican. And and that's people think North Dakota's been red forever. No, in my lifetime, for the first until I was a teenager, it was basically the congressperson was a Democrat and both senators were Democrats. And the party it's a dying party, it looks like.
So we head into the fun half. Joining us will be Naomi Const. She's going to join. She's going to hop on right now. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. Maybe we should get up and just figure out which state we're going to move to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I want to go somewhere warm if I have a second chance.
Second chance?
Yeah, at life. I have too many roots here at this point, but if I'm reincarnated, just bring me to a beach. God, I love it.
Well, I mean, you wait long enough, maybe the beach comes to us. That's the shot.
I am playing the long game.
Yeah. Hi, Naomi.
I don't know what just happened, but I loved the end of that conversation just now. Gloom and doom.
That's kind
we just
of the
had
theme.
a great conversation with the author of The Long Southern Strategy, and she had done massive data dives into Southern women. And her perspective is that this is the untold story of really what is, and this is all work they did in 2010, 2012, 2016. It was a book that came out in 2019, but it really is about the Long Southern Strategy that was a sort of race, gender, religion.
Like Phyllis Schlafly,
Exactly.
aligned. Yeah.
Anita Bryant. People forget Anita Bryant.
That's a great pitch. Can I do a really quick pitch? Because I think this is related because we have our own little strategy, if it's okay. It was a great segue. So passing to me for a second. So Matriarch, which is an organization that supports working class women running for office from school board to Congress, is doing a national training, digital, for free. That's not common. On January 29th, it's a full day. It's a campaign training for candidates and their staff, their senior staff. People are thinking about running for office, are running for office, are in office, with a heavy emphasis on folks who are going to be running or thinking about running against Proud Boys and QAnon supporters at the local level. We know that they are putting a lot of money into that right now. And the way that we think that we can combat this is just getting as many working class women to run for office at the local level because they're scared to death of women. It's clear.
We will put a link to that. If you send it to Bradley, we'll put a link to that in the podcast description and on the YouTube description. And with that said, let me also just read this email I got from Dylan, who's from Central Mass. He was running the Worcester Bernie office with his wife. I wonder if I met Dylan. John Benjamin and I were up there over the primary. I listened to Naomi Const speak with Ben Dixon today about the organizing prowess of the Republicans led by Steve Bannon. I want to reach out and tell you that I'm helping organize a lot of similar grassroots organizing, but through a left lens. I live in the most conservative rural part of deep blue Massachusetts. I am familiar with where he lives. The wackos are organizing. That's why I won't say specifically where he lives. I've never seen anything like it. Would you like to talk to me about the effort sometime? I'd like to put together a group of folks from across the country who are working on similar efforts. I'm focused on small towns as opposed to cities with the robust Democratic presence and rural regional school committees. Does this sound interesting? Yes. And my suggestion, when folks have things like this, head to our Discord. It is the best way to get in touch and put it out there. That way it exists on the Discord and people can bump into it maybe a couple of days later, a week later, and people on the Discord talk. And if somebody says, I'm thinking about doing this, then, this is the way that people organize across, outside of their local spaces. This is the way local spaces organize with other local spaces. Mm-hmm. And so this is a good place for that. So Dylan, head over there. And if you're interested in what Dylan's doing, head over there. And Dylan, if you've got candidates who in your locality who could use some training, or campaign managers could use some training, or you could use some training, check out the link that we'll put in there from Matriarch.
Matriarchtraining.com. And we're partnering with a bunch of different organizations out there that have been doing this work for years and years. The biggest issue is we just realized the progressive infrastructure is just not there yet compared to the amount of work that they're doing. But with that being said, running for Congress is great. It's also very expensive. If you want to run for something and you want to run against, my mindset is the Nazis are here and like we got to run against them. Bad Democrats are bad and we need better Democrats, but we also need to take these guys on, and they're running in races that are much more, it is not as sophisticated. You don't have to have as sophisticated of an operation to run for
lower
many
bar
school
entry,
boards.
as it were.
Exactly. That's a better way of saying it. Exactly. That's why you're the boss, Sam. You have a more sophisticated vocabulary than I do.
Lower bar to entry. I just borrowed that from that's just the, I don't know, like the whole business thing. That's him.
He is the boss, but he's not a boss.
Like Springsteen.
No,
Got it. No,
you're like a boss is you're cool. The boss.
I know the lingo.
Boss.
Believe me, I'm aware of the lingo. Oh yeah, I know.
Thus proving my point.
Yes,
Well, now with the new look, your boss.
With the new look, right? Exactly.
Have you seen this yet? Oh well, I guess you did. You were on the show when I wasn't here in the first year of.
Yeah, did you see my beard before? You saw it.
Oh
right?
yeah, no, I commented when people said it was new. I said no.
Beard has its own spin-off show. But before we get to that, Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
Yeah, we got Ben Burgess on Left Reckoning tomorrow night to talk about his Christopher Hitchens book. Also, check out my John Milton episode on free speech, Areopagitica. That's Literary Hangover, patreon.com/literary hangover.
All right, we're going to head into the fun half of the program, ladies and gentlemen. Don't know if we'll take phone calls, but we will definitely take your IMs. You can IM us through the app, which you can get for free at majorityapp.com. See you there. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the fun half. What?
What?
Someone come shower with Crowder. Jimmy Dore called you I thought it was a psyop. No,
no.
Called me a wussy for rescheduling your show right before his wife said most of their shows don't require masks or proof of vaccination. What a bunch of morons. Yes, that's my argument. They're morons. I was not personally afraid of catching COVID. I was afraid of other people maybe catching COVID. And if that makes me a P word, well, then so be it.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. We would have been on stage and thus more further distance from the rest of the crowd.
Well, everybody else would have been masks.
Yeah, and right. And
if you don't join the chorus with Lori Lightfoot and tell the Chicago teachers that they're just fear-mongered, you're a pussy.
I mean, honestly, I don't care that Jimmy says that.
He can say what he wants. Keep talking.
Yeah.
I would love to. I would love to give him the opportunity to say it to me over Zoom or even in person.
Come on the show, Jimmy, and we can talk it out.
Yeah.
I can't wait for him to join OAN. Isn't that happening? It's like the next step.
No, I think OAN is going to get bumped. So I don't think the cash is going to be there for him.
90% of OAN's revenue allegedly comes from AT&T subsidiaries like DirecTV, and they have just taken OAN off. Yeah, the cancel culture, like they've been totally censored. What shocks me though is I have Verizon Fios here, and I only have it. You know, I shouldn't be paying for cable, but I do it because I want to watch MSG. Yeah, which they still don't offer an a la carte package, which is really annoying. But anyway, they they still have OAN here in New York City. Verizon Fios. Why?
Finance guys and Long Island.
Yeah, Long Island.
Right. That's all you need to say.
Staten Island, Long Island.
Right.
And
well, I wouldn't be surprised actually if the carriage deal there goes the other way. Like, I knew the guy who set up HBO was like one of the first executives, and they would go into places, and sometimes they would pay to get carriage by cable operators. Sometimes you get paid. Fox makes most of its money not from advertising, but from carriage fees, because people demand Fox in their cable carrier in Wichita. The cable company in Wichita has Fox and gives Fox, I don't know, 4 cents, 11 cents, 7 cents per viewer, and that's the way they make their money. But it can also go the other way, where, something like OAN, they probably had someone put in probably big bucks. They probably pay something maybe to Verizon to stay on, because you're in New York. You want to be in the New York media area, so that you perceived as being real. So, all right. But apropos of our guest today, and the long Southern strategy, how chasing white voters in the South changed American politics, Angie Maxwell made the argument that white women in the South, just not a cohort that has been received enough attention, both from politicians, Democratic politicians, but also from academics trying to understand what's been going on over the past 30, 40 years. And here is Alabama Senate candidate Wendy Rogers at a Trump rally in Florence, Arizona. See, as she speaks, as she's warming up the crowd, see if any of like that sense of we are being put upon and we are being disrespected and comes across in this.
Keep in mind, you know where Florence is. You know why that's relevant?
Where is Florence?
It's the prison. It's where, what's his name with the pink... Arpaio, yeah.
And let us never forget the weak-kneed Republicans who sold us out. Always remember them and make sure we vote them out of office. the Crenshaws, the Kinsingers, the Maces, they all need to go.
They sold us out. They betrayed us.
So this is Wendy Rogers, who has called for the imprisonment of the Maricopa County officials who did not buy the election audit that was happening there. So she's like,
right there.
You know, I mean, you can see it with that ridiculously big hat that she has on. It, like the font's just enough. I mean, it keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Because the audience is getting older and older.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, they don't have to squint when they read "Save America" or whatever it says. Yeah, I mean, she's a true fascist. So that comes across, I think.
Meanwhile, let's watch this. This I found sort of stunning. At first, I was like, "Oh, maybe he's referring to like Manchin and Sinema." I'm talking about the Democratic strategist Paul Begala with CNN's Poppy Harlow, talking about responding to Martin Luther King's daughter-in-law, suggesting that, you know, the Democrats are not doing enough and that Biden's not doing enough in terms of like pressuring for voting rights. And here is Begala. This is interesting theory.
Paul, let me start with you and the words of the daughter-in-law of Martin Luther King Jr., Andrea Waters King. This is what she told Politico, quote, "What we have seen with President Biden is what happens when he puts the full force and power behind an issue like infrastructure. What we want to see is that same power and passion being put behind voting rights." Do you think that's fair criticism? Did President Biden put more effort into getting infrastructure passed, for example?
Well, he got infrastructure passed, and that's a good thing because success can breed success. He is putting the full force of the presidency behind it. I think the problem for the Democrats right now is not that they have bad leaders. They have bad followers. Okay, I read the most amazing essay today from Andy Young. You know, Andy was former mayor of Atlanta, former UN ambassador, and more importantly, probably the closest confidant and aide to Dr. King. He told the story. December of 1964, Andy Young and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. go to see Lyndon Johnson to push him for a Voting Rights Act. Johnson says, "I can't do it. I used all my power to get the Civil Rights Act done last year. I don't have the power to push Congress any further on voting rights." As they left the White House, Andy Young's words, he said, I asked Dr. King what he thought. He said, "I think we got to go get the president some power." And so you know what they did? They organized. These are Andy Young's words. "We mobilized the churches, the universities, the labor unions, the business community, a coalition of people of goodwill." In other words, those of us who want to save voting rights, we need to get to work. I do think Biden is putting everything behind this, but he needs better followers. So he needs all of us in the game as well.
I remember what he said about the power.
Oh, boy. Well, maybe if the PRO Act was passed and we had unions that could organize, maybe if we had state parties that were effing funded and we had a pipeline to organize, it's almost like Paul Begala and his little group of people basically cut the legs out from any organization that could organize.
That's right. I mean, let's be clear what's happened with the past 3 or 2 Democratic administrations. You had the one that he worked for, Clinton, and nothing to strengthen unions, to organize those unions. Basically lost the South. So the churches are out of the, are out of contention. You had Obama, which the Obama administration set out to disempower not only the state parties, right, with Rahm Emanuel coming in as the party chair after his ouster, but also any other outside organizations, and make sure that none of those were funded. God knows how many years that set things back. And incidentally, under Obama, the loss of 1,000 Democratic state and local seats, there's no infrastructure anymore.
Well, this is like what kills me. Remember the shellacking? You would think after the shellacking, Obama would be like, maybe we should put a little bit more money into the parties. Now what they do is they have this gimmick. It's like means testing for state parties, where the state parties have to prove that they're viable, and then they get a little grant that pays for like one mailer. I mean, there's only like 3 parties that can function independently of the DNC. It's New York, California, and Illinois. This is a joke.
There's this famous Bertolt Brecht poem, Die Lösung. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right in German, but here I'll just read it. After the uprising of the 17th of June, the secretary of the Writers' Union had leaflets distributed on the Stalinallee, stating that the people had forfeited the confidence of the government and could only win it back by increased work quotas. Would it not be simpler for the government to dissolve the people and elect another? And like that's the thing, he mentions LBJ as if Biden's been acting like LBJ and given anybody like the idea that, oh, if we do a little bit more pushing, maybe we can get some more. There's been no actual like encouragement of.
But Biden used all of his power, just like LBJ did, to get the Civil Rights Act. He used all that to get the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was basically a highway bill.
Right.
I mean, if there was a story where Joe Biden expended all of his power that he had and it expended, but this guy was the one who was saying 6 months, the Republicans, don't worry. And Joe Manchin, well, I don't need to deal with him for whatever, 6 to 8 months. Or Chuck Schumer sitting on that memo in July, or let's invite the Republicans in, because what we really have to worry about is this show that we're bipartisan. And then when they fail, let's let Portman and Sinema come in. And then let's tell the progressives, hey guys, don't worry. I promise you the votes are there for the Build Back Better bill. Just pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I mean, to not see the failure of the Democratic leadership here is to be completely, I just living in a different planet.
It's the commitment to the zombie Democratic Party is religious, and the zombie Democratic Party can never have its own failures. Only the voters who are supposed to get behind them, regardless of how they screw over the people that got them in a position of power. You still have to be behind them. So just, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. That's the dynamic here. And I understand that both of these parties are filled with elites who are out of touch, and that they largely can't stand the people that get them into power, and they have contempt for them. I understand that that's the case, but at least the Republicans try to hide it a little bit better and give them red meat that the base cares about. The Democratic Party doesn't even do any of that. Biden won't cancel $1 of student debt right now, which would be an exact kind of thing that would throw you could throw some sustenance to your base. But they starve you, and then they say, why don't you support us?
Why aren't you strong?
You got your tests, guys. I think they've done enough. You got your at-home tests.
But we didn't even get those.
You get it. First off, they're not ready yet.
Oh, right.
It takes 10 days for them to show up. So get your tests right now. Get your tests right now.
No, but you bring up a good point, Emma. It reminds me of what year did gay marriage pass? Was 2013? Am I wrong?
Obergefell, I think, was 2013, 2014. Yeah, I'm not sure.
So I remember when Obama used to be like, you've got to make me move on it. You get out on the streets and make me move. Well, they did get out on the streets and he still didn't move. But you know who did it? Joe Biden with his slip of his one of his
his Ellen appearance or whatever.
Yeah, that's what made him move. Was Joe Biden went off script for like a half a second.
Right, accidentally. I think it was on Meet the Press or something, something to that effect. Yeah.
Make you. Well, we did. You told us to make you move. We did it. We staged an uprising in the party.
Well, the funny part too is that Begala is sitting there commenting, criticizing someone for getting up and doing exactly what he just called for them to be doing.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's like, we got to make Joe Biden do it. Don't criticize him about not doing it.
Act like he's doing it.
Oh my God. What if we just say, thank you, Joe Biden?
Right.
There was a person I know who once got a job on a presidential campaign by sending out a press release that they were the senior advisor. They had not been hired. They became the senior advisor because it was too embarrassing for that story.
Oh yeah, I know. I got a story like that too.
We should just do that with Biden. Thanks for
yeah, we should just walk over to Joe Manchin's office and go, hey, really appreciate you voting to carve out the filibuster.
Wait, what? Did I do that in my sleep?
Did I?
Gotcha.
Ambien. I gotta lay off the Ambien.
Jiu-jitsu, guys. Jiu-jitsu.
So that's three-dimensional chess for you.
Congratulations.
Here is new Governor Glenn Youngkin talking about Southern women carrying the day, maybe. Republican, recently elected to Virginia governor. He was sworn in as governor, and his first order of business was to ban critical race theory from Virginia schools. Here he is defending his decision. I don't know if it's going to have any real world implications, but it just sort of depends on what exactly is in the ban. But he's explaining that there is no racism.
School system. We're not going to teach our children to view everything through a lens of race. Yes, we will teach all history, the good and the bad, because we can't know where we're going unless we know where we have come from. But to actually teach our children that one group is advantaged and another is disadvantaged simply because of the color of their skin cuts across everything we know to be true. And the immortal words of Dr. Martin Luther King ring in our ears that we must judge one another by the content of our character and not the color of our skin. This is what will be the founding principle of our executive order, what we're going to do in Virginia schools.
No. What's amazing about this is that is not the quote. Not that we must, that he hopes that one day we can, which implies that at that time that we're not. And in fact, one group is advantaged over another group. And that is exactly what Youngkin denies is the case. There is no structural racism in the country, as he says. Everyone is on equal playing field right now. And
very curious, like, what's the bad? He says there's bad history. What is the bad history? Please explain it to us. Oh, that's critical race theory.
No, it's when the feds told the states what they had to do. That's the bad stuff. The overreach.
That is the one MLK quote that they can't even get right that conservatives use. And I mean, yesterday was an onslaught of that stuff.
It's disgusting.
It's enough. And if I see one more brand tweet about MLK, I'm going to lose my shit too. Enough. I mean, the idea that these people have the gall to put this man's name in their mouth is like unbelievable to me. And they leave out all of the other parts we talked about, you know, the war on poverty, the fact that he endorsed democratic socialism, the fact that he was an anti-war advocate, and none of that penetrates. But like these people, and we've allowed it as a society because he's been deified to this degree, or become like a national saint, where it's completely strips all of the bravery and the meaning of his leadership from it, and it's gross.
There should be
the
more
nuance too.
There should be more discussed with this project, which basically like turned the content of your character's "I Have a Dream" speech into like MLK rebuking the civil rights movement for being too caught up with race. It's like that's a white supremacist revision. That's what it is.
Yep.
That's right.
They're going to make a monument of Youngkin now for being the new MLK.
That is exactly like. They are trying to argue that MLK was basically saying, like, stop seeing race everywhere.
You see it everywhere.
He would have loved...
outside, you see some racism happening. That's no way to go through life.
It's Obama, guys.
Why are you so caught up in it?
Let me be clear. Race doesn't exist anymore. Because I was elected.
With all of that said about the attempts by the right to appropriate Martin Luther King and make his legacy about not seeing race, not being so caught up and convinced that there's racism in America.
And not literally going to jail via civil disobedience in order to combat racism.
But they didn't.
This is actually a decent. This is a decent correction. Leave it to Steven Crowder to make it explicitly more clear. That,
I prefer this. I prefer this.
At least it's being.
You're honest.
He's so dumb he can't even have the act.
I want to say he's honest, but when you start to actually listen to the content of it, it's really stupid.
But the racism coming from an honest place, and at least you're like making it clear. No. Everybody on the right and then some during this time period. If MLK was alive today, they would have been in the 65+% that did not approve of him when he was polled right up into his death.
The intent is honest. What he delivers is actually not honesty per se, but the intent is honest.
No, the visceral racism that spews out of every part of him is honest.
Here is Cold Feet Crowder yesterday devoting an entire segment of their MLK Day broadcast to uncover reports and historical record that, contrary to what he believes people think of Dr. King, that MLK encouraged violent protest and rioting. Here it is.
Well, here's the thing. Everything we're about to share with you comes directly from congressional records, archived newspapers, MLK's own speeches. And I know the FBI is not an organization that I trust. Okay, I want to be very clear. However, none of the evidence that we'll be providing for you here has actually been refuted by anyone in the MLK camps.
Yeah, they just don't like how they obtained it.
Right. It was surveillance transcripts that were reported by a guy named David Garrow. But he also, this is the biographer. He obtained these transcripts from the FBI. He was the official biographer on MLK. He won the 97 Pulitzer Prize. So this is a man who was very pro. Did I say?
You said 90, 87.
87.
Yeah.
And the FBI surveillance audio will be released in 2027. I don't know why they picked that year. I have no idea.
Specific year? Later, Yeah. They're like, oh, crap, it's getting closer.
So here's something that you probably know that MLK, for example, let's start with this. Supported peaceful protest.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That is true. Sometimes. He also had some pretty, I guess you could say, unsavory opinions about riots that I do think need to be considered because a lot of people don't know this part.
Now, pause it. I'm like, and I saw this, I was like, oh, awesome. How hard is he going to go at this? Now, I do think that what Crowder, and I don't know that Crowder was going to actually, but as you say, like, by the time we get into the late 60s, he is arguing that we cannot have racial justice without economic justice, and that he is advocating for socialism.
And he's made peace with Malcolm X at this point. Is he about to say that a riot is the language of the unheard? That quote, is he about to basically say that doesn't count?
Which is like. I'm like, oh, darn it. I thought he was actually going to have uncovered something where MLK was like, let it burn.
Bomb away.
But no, that's not what it is. It's really just the most, but I mean, it's,
burn it to the
it's
ground.
Exactly what you would think MLK would have said.
Kick his fucking head in.
Yeah. Here's Crowder trying to make this seem super nefarious when
I love it.
Anybody who has even a passing knowledge of MLK would be like, yeah, no kidding. Why are you making it sound like you've uncovered something?
I just want to quickly puncture. Crowder has this posture that he's anti-FBI now just because of Jan 6, but if the FBI has its sights on either Muslims or black people, he'll take their word
on
for
board.
It.
Totally on board. Here we go.
To MLK, for example, let's start with this. Supported peaceful protest.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That is true. Sometimes. He also had some pretty, I guess you could say, unsavory opinions about riots that I do think need to be considered because a lot of people don't know this part.
And continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way. Continue to affirm that there is another way. But at the same time, it is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities as it is for me to condemn riots.
I agree with everything, so that's fine.
I think America
which is everything
must see.
Of course, you didn't realize
Riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again.
See, and that's the problem, is the open-endedness to it, because, well, what is justice? Well, right now people are saying, oh, injustice is there are too many Asians at Stanford. So let's burn down a Walgreens.
Yeah.
No,
Be more specific than
you need to be a little more
happening.
specific. And let me be clear too. At another 1967 speech, and we'll get to the crack whores, and we'll get to the orgies, we'll get to all of that, which a lot of you don't know about.
For a second, pause. First off, commendable for Crowder, because probably that's more of MLK's actual speaking that most of Crowder's audience and probably crew, probably Crowder himself, have ever seen. A. B, note that he's criticizing MLK for supposedly not being as nonviolent as we think he was, while he's got a gun on him. You should just say, you know, because the gun is, it's not about violence. It's about stopping violence. And then also, he has a problem with the open-endedness of it.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I don't think that there's been riots about what he said that there was going to be riots about. I think there was riots about black people being killed by police officers.
Well, why didn't he just take the route of like, oh, well, you know, I don't agree with Martin Luther King on riots here, but I can understand what he's saying because of January 6th, right? They are the unheard. This is the silent majority. They are not able to participate in society in the way that I think. So, I mean, he could have gone that way, but instead he's just like,
and then he realizes he's in trouble because he hasn't really, you get the sense that he's like, I didn't sell that very well.
Yeah, I didn't watch it. It seems like
it seemed more scary to me when I was watching in the privacy of my own home than when I'm watching in front of all of you.
When I watch it in front of you guys, and I realized like everything he was saying was like incredibly just reasonable.
Yeah.
But it was too open-ended. Then what he does is he pivots to, and then we'll get to the stuff about the crack whores.
Yeah.
The leaked tapes. Yeah.
Right. Incidentally, like crack was invented 15 years after Martin Luther King.
Is there any evidence that Martin Luther King's what? But this is about his mistresses, like you know, he's gonna
maybe he had prostitutes, or I don't know what it was that he's. But
oh, so he's going real old school here. He's just using the same tactics as the racists in the 1960s are.
Listen, I don't agree with the FBI.
I'm glad you're owning it.
I don't agree with the FBI, but I am going to use all the stuff that they covered to discredit him.
Thank you very much for that football, J. Edgar Hoover. I will pick that up and run with it.
Exactly.
Or is that it?
That's it.
Also, what's the deal with the Walgreens? Like, because of standardized testing issues, like people are rioting. That's his excuse.
That's why people are stealing detergent from Walgreens. It's because Asian SAT scores.
No. People are stealing detergent from Walgreens because MLK was so open-ended that they can justify doing it because of Asian people and SAT scores.
Retail theft is important.
But again, this is what
I give you a blanket go card to do it if in the future somebody's getting SAT scores.
I just really appreciate how, though, he is more honest than other Republicans and conservatives and centrists that are about
disowning him as opposed to trying to appropriate it.
But right, because guy, he's either the patron saint of America and like, you know, Tide detergent is going to tweet out why MLK is so important, and you listen to what he says about all of the other like harder aspects of racism and capitalism and imperialism that are more difficult for elites to stomach, or you be like Crowder and admit that you actually don't really agree with the one of the more important progressive activists in our country, and like let's not just completely whitewash everything he stood for. And
but
so
I think it's because
that's more helpful because it's more clear what this is what Republicans and conservatives are when it relates to MLK and what he stood for.
But that I think is because he's a meathead and he's dumb and it's too complicated to speak in code for him. Like his brain does not operate that way. I don't think he watched the clip in advance. I think he was like processing real time, and he's just, I mean, but that is a faction of the right. Like they're targeting, you know, Fox News is too sophisticated. You can't get a contributorship there. You got to play lots of games there and maneuver different bases and different shows.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I went to the Glenn Beck 9/12 rally or whatever it was 1440, I can't remember which rally it was. People can find it on our channel. This was 12 years ago. I met a guy there who had a sign that said something to the effect of like Martin Luther King was a communist, and I went up to him and we were talking, and he's like, I love Glenn Beck, but he is absolutely wrong about MLK. He should not be promoting MLK at all. He was a communist and this and that. And I thought like, oh, this is refreshing.
Yeah,
this is refreshing.
Can I have that sign? Thanks.
Oh yeah, I did an interview with him. I think it's on the thing.
Yeah,
I think it's on
the only way Crowder's position there is sort of consistent is if he's a complete pacifist, which is not compatible with, you know, the sort of like
the holsters,
holster American Revolution Boston Tea Party guy.
Right.
Also, did you see, just a real side note, that his producer was wearing a shirt that said "Dad" on it? You might want to like have a rule, a dress code. Don't have it said "Dad."
Oh yeah, well he had a shirt. He got a shirt on too that said "This dad fights," unless it's involving like, I mean, tough shirt to wear when you're complaining that MLK wasn't as much of a pacifist as you suggest he should be, but also, I think we also know like when he says fights, he doesn't mean like I go and.
He means shits his pants. This dad shits his pants.
This dad pretends his wife is in the hospital with twins because there's a complication in the pregnancy to avoid debating somebody with a much smaller YouTube channel.
Yeah.
But that shirt, that wouldn't fit on the shirt in the front.
This dad blames women for everything.
Remember when we kept the start time of our show open-ended? That made Crowder really nervous too.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go. Michael Tracy's delightful girlfriend. I miss Michael's MLK impressions. Yes, same. I think that was the only thing that we were thinking as we were doing ours. Aaron is not cool. MLK was a walking bucket. Eric Adams.
Oh man.
What?
I forgot the Eric Adams clip.
Wait, what?
Eric Adams did some sick some great MLK
I didn't even see this.
appreciation.
Oh my God.
He is. Can we have like a spectrum, like an Eric Adams of the day, like on a crazy level, like where it lies? And every day there's like 3 or 4 comments. I'm just like,
I mean, he's going for the world record here. He's like with just problematic / gaffes / bizarre instances. What did he say?
I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
Oh, I can't wait for this.
Should we do one of these other ones, or you decide which one of like 10, 11, 12 we should do? I don't want to do all 3 of those.
Okay.
Artist. It's time for us to do what we've been doing, and that time is every day.
Kamala Harris quote.
Wait, that's a real quote of hers?
Pretty much, yeah. Have you guys been doing is like what we've been doing? I can't really do the quote, but it's like we've been doing it every day, and we're going to continue doing it.
Can I play the Adams clip?
Yes.
Please.
Great.
So just to preface this is Eric Adams speaking at the Knicks Hornets game yesterday in Madison Square Garden.
I saw this live
on MLK Day, just to commemorate the proceedings before they start.
Yeah, I saw this live.
Some of the most difficult moments. When the civil rights battle was on the line, Dr. King wanted the ball in his hand. and he gave his life to ensure that our country would be a better place for all of us. Right now, we want the ball in our hand again, as we deal with COVID, as we deal with crime, as we deal with uncertainty. Let's win this for Team New York and Team America. Let's take the ball and have the final goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, that he also did a 5 to 7 minute long interview with the MSG broadcast crew too, where he said absolutely nothing at all.
Just to reiterate, that was he said when the civil rights movement was on the line, MLK wanted the ball in his hands, as if he's like Larry Bird or something. Like, pass me the rock. There's only 5 minutes left. It's go time.
Guys, I love the audience saying "Shut the f up."
Things are going to get really, really odd soon with that dude. I mean,
we are going to a crypto economy, guys. Just want y'all to know. Brock Pierce is going to be our deputy mayor pretty soon while he's running for Senate in Vermont and living in Puerto Rico with tax breaks. It's going to be fun. Thanks, de Blasio.
And I remember actually, Naomi, you called this a long time ago. Crypto haven, Puerto Rico, after the hurricane. That seems to be where they're setting up a lot. I don't want to spoil anything if you're doing research on this, but that seems to be where they're setting up a ton of crypto infrastructure. Yeah.
I mean, this is part of the documentary. It's a really fun part of the documentary, which I'm really excited about. We're going to tease it out. We're going to cut some clips up because this is happening so fast. So I can't wait to share with you. But I went not undercover with Brock Pierce for a week. I was fully at TYT with the footage, and he just didn't care. And he thought he was controlling, like he was pulling in a left audience. And there were it was bad. It was like, I went to one of their parties, there's drugs everywhere, there's security people, and they're openly talking like white supremacy. There was a guy in the crypto community yesterday who posted on a Facebook group for this Act 2022 tax breaks saying, oh, don't worry about all the protesters. They're not going to be living on the island in 5 years because they won't afford to live here, and we're going to drive them out.
It's all hedge funders too that are going down there, right? And buying up everything, all the distressed properties. And
it's really gross. Like we did this thing on Left Reckoning on Crypto Land. This plans to like buy like a Fijian island and have it like on the property on the blockchain. Like it's just disgusting to me that this sort of class of people do basically like distinguish only by having more money than sense and more money than they know what to do with. Basically get to buy a property across the world, and then they sell it to us as if they're decentralizing anything or or empowering people generally against the Fed or something. No, you're the like modern settlers.
It's white supremacy. They call themselves Columbus. Like Brock Pierce literally said, we are Columbus. We are conquering a new land here. And they've bought up all the lawmakers there who lean to statehood. There's a reason they want statehood, because by the time it becomes a state, which another bill is being shoved through Congress right now by the right wing of Puerto Rico, by the time that happens, there aren't going to be enough Puerto Ricans there. So it's not about like empowering them. It's about, okay, now it's a tax haven. It's just another Florida.
Right.
Yeah. I like love the concept of the buying the private island to run a scam. You know, Billy McFarland did it first. Like we better pray that didn't get out of prison, the Firefest guy, in time for like this crypto boom, because he would have been all over that stuff.
I think he was involved in it because these guys have been doing this since like 2011, 12. They have oh my God, I'm giving away the whole documentary. Sorry, guys. It's a part of the documentary. There's this one crypto guy who I interviewed 4 years ago, and he sat there and he pulled out this map of this zone in Guatemala that he was buying up. And I mean, it was horrifying. He was like, and then we're going to have our own laws. And basically, if we get enough people here, we're going to vote out their lawmakers and put a crypto person in charge. He has this, and it's insane when you're listening to them. And then because our country is run by money, these absolutely nutty people are taking actual power. Bill de Blasio hung out with Brock Pierce 2 weeks ago in Puerto Rico when I was down there. Bill de Blasio. Brock Pierce was on the inauguration committee of Donald Trump.
Ish.
Sorry. You started it.
Yes, I did.
Josh from Tucson. Hey, MR crew. I found out I've been selected for trial in federal jury service. I ordered a pack of MR masks so that I can make sure, say loud and proud, that I am a member of the Majority Report community. What other mask should I try to get hold of? The trial is 4 days. I would get an N95 or a KN95 or even a KF94, put that on, and then put the MR mask over it.
Yeah.
Well, if you wear the MR mask, they might select you out of the jury, and you won't be on it. So
it might not
exactly.
So right, wear both.
But you should
want to be on the jury.
You want the KN95 to be touching your face, and then you can put another mask over it, which will help keep it in place.
They might actually give you a mask because of that. Like you can't.
Probably true.
Yeah, because in the screening, you know, as we know from the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, you have to disclose lots of things.
Jonathan Armstead, the guest is right. Phyllis Schlafly was a jerk who weaponized anti-feminism. She lived in my hometown, and a classmate was her paper girl. Phyllis never tipped, and the paper girl asked why. Phyllis said it was because only boys should deliver newspapers. From then on, the paper girl threw the newspaper into a tree in Phyllis's front yard, so she'd be forced to reach to get it. She eventually lost the job. Jesus.
Well, I mean, that is an amazing story, but I don't think we needed that to know that Phyllis Schlafly is a piece of crap. But I do like
a good story, though.
But it is like perfectly in context of what we know about her.
Union Jack, Sam, Emma, thank you so much for inspiring me to take action and do on-ground activism. Next week, we are playing a strike in Colorado. Thanks to awareness due to podcasts and shows like yours, we were able to identify anti-vaxxers and anti-CRT activists from our union. They wanted to join forces with us, but we told them to fight their wage issues on their own. Many of our members told how we should check ideologies of our union members, and we finally cleaned it up.
What union?
I don't understand. Did you get rid of people in your union?
For ideological?
I don't know if I would do that.
Yeah, I don't know how that...
Wait, what? But some unions are forcing people, you know, you have to be vaccinated. So there are protests happening within unions. Like, I don't know what percentage of, but it's I don't know. I don't know if it's through the union or if it's through the government that's mandating government workers that are part of union.
Wyoming Ryan, religion is a bane on freedom and basic human rights at this time. Humans are too gullible and vindictive for religion to be a force of good. We never have been. Crusades, anyone? Religion in the South is akin to domestic terrorism, and not because those few humans who can coexist with religion, but because people fall for the propaganda of those using religion as a carrot on a stick for public policy. I mean, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I mean, I am sympathetic to that perspective, very sympathetic to that perspective. I don't know that that's the best way to talk if you want to win elections there.
Couldn't you say a lot of that about just culture in general?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, religion has been the most durable mechanism that has been sort of like abused in that way. Desmond Tutu just passed away recently. Yeah. I'll never forget this. He came onto the Majority Report.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, back on radio. Oh, yeah. And he said that religion is like a knife, a butter knife. You have a knife. You can use it to cut butter, or you can use it to stick into someone's belly. And I thought that was a pretty good assessment. It's just that it gets the belly stuff a little bit more than it does the butter stuff sometimes. But you don't need religion to stick someone in the gut with a knife, and you don't need religion to spread butter either.
You need religion to organize the people who you need to stick a knife in the gut of others.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Like, I'm not a fan of religion, but I also think going at it as like that's your point of attack is not really a useful strategy.
Terribly productive. Trucker Carlson, as a lapsed Southern Baptist, I was very impressed by Angie Maxwell's dissection of white evangelical politics. It was among the most intelligent and nuanced I have heard. The fundamental shift of the late 70s in the denomination is one of the most important undertold stories in American politics. My grandparents' generation of Baptists, while generically conservative, was the quietest overall. Things have changed, obviously. Militant apathy. This guest is 100% correct. I said from the outset, when Obama won in 2008, it was considered an outlier by Southern white folks. 2012 broke their effing brains. This lady understands the Southern mind. Yes, 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 exactly. Yes, yes, yes. We have to be pragmatic because we're living behind enemy lines. That's why the smugness and the rose rage is so counterproductive here.
Yeah.
Cowboys suck. Hey, Emma, I saw yesterday Kay Adams from the NFL Network said she thought about doing a podcast, perhaps around sports betting, if you were looking for a co-host for the VIG.
The context of the when that came up was that that's probably not what I'm gonna do, but maybe, sure, I'll reach out.
The VIG. I like that.
I'll reach out to Kay Adams.
A Square. Wow, Sam, Dems are reading the wrong political analysis since 1979. Look at Paul Begala now, saying that Dems have the wrong followers versus leaders. And the news about the death of Build Back Better and the likely voting rights bill demise is more reason for folks to listen to Majority Report interviews with Wanevu and Hilton. Apropos, Nomiki and Ben Dixon were talking recently about having to try and build up the Democratic Party infrastructure every 2 to 4 years because of its current hollow and corporatist state. Hilton clearly outlines the reasons why I think this is insanity. His book or your Cliff Notes should be must-read for activists. Got to really understand the machine you're trying to leverage or reimagine. I think your comment of the party being like a confederacy is very astute. Between the 101 and the 5, holy shit, Sam, that feedback loop with the southern states and the pragmatism, this is the whole key. It's the Manchinima effect. CBD. Sam, I checked more info about the research about CBD and benefit for COVID that you quoted. It is not yet peer reviewed. You promoted something too soon that can potentially direct benefit to your show sponsors and without deep research being quoted. Thought it was quite irresponsible. Anyways, hope this peer is reviewed from a CBD fan. No. I think I explicitly said that the CBD A and G that they referenced in this is not in the vast majority of products that Sunset Lake sells. And I felt I delivered that story with the proper grain of salt. Pushback stopgap. As a leftist in Kentucky, the pragmatism described by your guests is true. But the other thing I find talking to moderate Dems is they can't envision a better future. I ask what they want their future to look like, and it's just about personal financial security. No Mikey. I love you, Nomiki. Sam, why did the MR YouTube channel stop uploading videos from the Nomiki show?
That's our thing. Sometimes we drop the ball. Thank you.
We don't run the tightest ship around here. Let's put it that way.
Just go to Nomi's channel to find them.
Exactly.
And subscribe. Yeah, that's it. Because we do the best ofs for of the week. On the weekend, I believe.
We created a scarcity on purpose.
Yes.
To drive you there. That was the right way to respond.
We figured out how to do the digital scarcity. My CIA handler. Speaking of organizing, Sam, please tell Nomi to check her email. I sent some documents. Let's go, Bradley.
Wait, who was that? I have to check my email. I feel like this is now like Nomi's assistants. Like, you're call in, guys.
Let's kill Bradley. Any advice on not going full doomer accelerationist?
I'm struggling right now myself.
Accelerationalist. I mean, in my mind, if you're going to be a doomer, no. I mean, advice is organize. Don't fret. Organize and organize big and organize strategically. That's what's keeping me sane right now.
Yeah, I feel like the process hasn't changed as far as like what you're saying about organizing and like basically politicizing your communities and making connections with folks. Like the process doesn't change whether it looks like Bernie's going to become president and bring us democratic socialism, or it looks like all those options are foreclosed. The process, the work is basically the same still.
I can't give any advice on not going full doomer. But in terms of accelerationist, where have we seen accelerationism in this country in particular work? I mean, I think there are just too many short circuits within the context of our society at this point to get there. I mean, we had the financial crisis. How bad does it have to get under the accelerationist? Like, what are we accelerating to? And where's the evidence that it's going to work out the way you think it's going to? I mean, that's my opinion about accelerationism.
Well, I think... Go on. No, I mean, it's never worked once. And then also what we're playing with is not, just let's in a vacuum achieve this end that we so desire. I want my team to win. It's also along the way, lots of bodies, lots of climate change, exacerbation that would be piled up along the way.
And honestly, it's with all due respect to anybody who's feeling this, it is almost a point of privilege to feel like, okay, I'm going full doomer when you might be in a safer position than others who don't have a choice but to fight because, their homes are underwater or police are murdering, people on the streets or their schools have mold in it and lead paint and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is the reason why so many everyday people are running for office is not because they want the power. Maybe it's a little bit about the left having power, but I think it's because they're just fed up and they realize no one's going to come and save them. And I think the same can be said from our perspective, like at Matriarch, is no organization is going to come and recruit you and save you. So just all hands on deck. I don't know. I mean, the way that the Republicans are working right now, in the last couple of years, they've ousted all these the election officials that stood in the way of Trump. They are thinking so detailed in terms they're focused on every little corner of this country. Don't expect anybody in the Democratic Party leadership to be doing that. And frankly, even progressive leadership, they have their own fights internally. Just do it. If you have a Nazi running your district, find someone to run against them. Just go.
Yeah.
Sammy Key. Bob Dylan breaks down the Southern strategy pretty good on only a pawn in their game. Maine lefty. This weekend, Freedom Works, who helped bring us the Tea Party, is putting on an election integrity training at the Constitution Hall that just opened last week in town. They're using the same strategy they used to get people into state and local office now to get people into the state and local elections mechanism. Not hard to break down why. I mean, there you go.
But, inner YouTube fights, very important right now. Super important, guys, that we focus on that.
In some pretty dire union and video game news, Microsoft just acquired Activision Blizzard. It's one of the largest video game companies in the world and has been recently knee-deep in workplace harassment and employee mistreatment lawsuits. Unionization efforts were underway while the lawsuit was ongoing, but now the buyout threatens the attempts being made to unionize because leadership didn't inform them of this acquisition. Hasn't communicated anything to pro-union workers. Please look into this. We'll check it out. Are we going to play Jimmy comparing himself to MLK?
I just found that. Shout out to Jeff Campbell who posted this.
Oh my God!
Back to the inner YouTube wars, guys.
Let's do this Greg Kelly thing first, and then maybe we'll play that. I mean, narcissism is pretty. It's how we got right-wing Mandela. Is that type of thing. Should we do this number 12 or 11? Which one do you want?
Let's do 12.
Okay. This is Newsmax Greg Kelly.
Oh, wait, I guess I was talking about 11.
Okay, sorry. All right, let's do 11 then.
Yeah.
This is Newsmax Grant Stinchfield.
Stinchfield. It rolls off the tongue every time.
He's with conservative commentator Isabel Brown, and they are talking about well, all right, let's just listen to, I guess apparently...
The contributors seem to kind of call for or wax poetically about the concept of unity, and then Stinchfield throws cold water on it.
Yeah, here we go, this briefing.
Yeah, absolutely. Isabel, I'll give you the last word on here, 30 seconds if you can.
The word that was used by the Democrat Party from the beginning of this administration was unity, that it was time to bring our country back together, and yet we only continue to see more division. I, for one, am grateful for commentary like this because I think it's going to backfire on the political left and gives us a real opportunity to see that we all have a lot more in common than we have that separates us.
Oh my God, what is happening? I hope you're right. You know, the two of you said, why can't we all just come together? You know, it's not often I disagree with you. I'm not ready for it. I want to steamroll them with everything that I have. I want to run ramshot right over them in the next election cycle and take the House and the Senate. And I really don't care what they think anymore because they're ruining this country. But I like how you two think because we need people like that, not just people like me who want to win for the good of the country.
Oh, I love
Isabel
that.
Brown, Jacqueline Toberoff, thank you both.
You know,
Thank you.
I missed that on the first. Sorry, I thought it was done. I missed that on the first watch. The like casual sexism that he directs at those two women.
You two are hysterical, and so that's fine.
You have the tender hearts of women, and you want to bring people together, and you want everyone to be okay. But the real man that knows what's up is we got to beat these liberals into the ground. And then the second thing that's most important to point out there is like, no, this is who we're dealing with. So when Nancy Pelosi comes out and talks about how we need a strong Republican Party, you want a strong pseudo-fascist movement with somebody like Stinchfield and Greg Kelly who look like clones of one another on the front lines, like mowing people down with guns. That's like that kind of crowd.
Well,
okay.
let's also be clear. Those two commentators, they don't believe it either.
No.
They're just like, their job is to deliver it, and his job is to give, like, we're going to have disagreement here. Should we blame Joe Biden for failing to bring the country together because Republicans refuse to do anything? Or should we just accept that we're going to steamroll? Well, see, we have both sides.
Yes. That was like a lot. I felt like that was an SNL thing. I literally thought that was an SNL skit when I saw that.
Right. Should we let them live as the, as just, exist, but as long as we're in power? Or should we just annihilate them? And, well, both sides. So there it is. There's Stinchfield. All right, a couple more IMs here, and we'll wrap it up.
What about the other thing?
Oh, the Jimmy Dore thing?
Teased it. Everyone's going to be upset.
But do we want to even...
Well, we've already mentioned his name.
All right, let's take a look at this. This should be interesting.
Who's on Greenwald Watch?
Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. And boy, is that the real... even in a small way, I experienced that with Forced to Vote in a very small way. It was the people who thought they were reasonable. Hey, it wouldn't pass. They try to think of reasonable reasons not to have health care in the middle of a deadly pandemic in the richest country in the world. Many of the civil rights community warned King
for 1 second. I just want to be clear on what I just want to be clear on what I heard. King is talking about those who are sitting idly by while black people are denied the right to vote, like a whole host of human rights in the context. Those who are sitting idly by are in some ways worse than the ones who at least you can identify as being absolute enemy,
like Boogaloo Boys, for example.
Antagonists to black rights is just like what Jimmy Dore was subjected to when he was criticized for saying that the most progressive members of the House caucus, as progressive as they are or aren't, are sellouts because they don't want to hold a failing vote. This is the black box, right? With that whole force the vote thing was, once you have the failed vote, then you get Medicare for all.
But he adds moral weight to it by saying giving people health care in a pandemic. They were never going to do that.
The white moderates kept getting in our way. We were trying to reach across to our Ku Klux Klan brothers, but the white moderates said no, and then it set us behind. Yeah, exactly.
We need a failed vote on the House floor on the Voting Rights Act. And then we're going to have a failed vote on the Civil Rights Act, and then we'll have them.
Because then we can primary him.
Also, I'm pretty sure MLK organized. Remember when they went to the Capitol with their 12 people and gave a rally?
That was on YouTube. Well, I'm surprised Jimmy doesn't have a problem with MLK specifying that he's concerned about the plight of the American Negro, because that seems like identity politics.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue on. Let's see how else he can center himself on MLK's birthday.
Ignore the war so as not to alienate the Democratic Party. This is from his speech. For those who ask the question, aren't you a civil rights leader and thereby mean to exclude me from the movement for peace? That's what people did to me. Oh, he's not an approved. I wasn't an approved grassroots healthcare activist, and so they're forced to vote. I wasn't approved.
Pause it.
Oh my God.
You got to be approved?
No. There's no approval process, dude. Because you actually didn't do anything. It's actually because you did nothing. But I guess continue. I just want to point that out.
But I also they said, aren't you a civil rights leader, thereby to exclude me from the movement for peace? I guess the idea was like, you're just but all what I've achieved is on my YouTube channel.
Right.
Fucking bartender, I thought just a couple years ago. You got to be approved? No, you don't. The last years of King's life saw him escalate his campaign against economic inequality. He campaigned against the Oklahoma right-to-work referendum and warned that increased
wait a second. How can he buy what is being written in The Intercept?
I know, right? Does Brian Grimm associated with that publication? I wonder if he...
Why don't you just slap up what Pierre Omidyar wants you to say about MLK? But wait a second. All right, go back here. Let's just watch him read from a magazine article. Here we go.
You got to be approved? No, you don't. The last years of King's life saw him escalate his campaign against economic inequality. He campaigned against the Oklahoma right-to-work referendum and warned that increased economic competition between whites and blacks would undermine civil rights.
Pause it for a second. I found out who wrote this article. It's Zayed Zayjalani.
Zayjalani. Oh, he's in the approved. Yeah.
So now it's
the approved, yeah.
Right, of course, of the Substack crew, who's no longer.
I just want to see where he's going, because he thinks he's stumbled onto something magical. Like all those people out there have been saying that we should be practicing segregationist policies when it comes to the working class. He's just figured out something. Good.
Calling instead for a grand alliance between working class whites and blacks. What do you think he would say to a bunch of working class libertarian gun nuts? I know what he would say. He would say, let's join together and fight the oligarchy for economic justice. What do you think he would say, Kurt?
I don't know. What do you think you would say to somebody at the border, like with a gun ready to shoot any sort of Mexican crossing the border?
What do you think MLK would say? I would say, yeah, I don't know why I'm doing the voice. What do you think MLK would say about Kyle Rittenhouse? He'd say Kyle Rittenhouse, clearly a hero, and should get off.
I have a feeling that MLK would realize, like, well, if someone's a libertarian, they're not going to have a problem overthrowing the oligarchy. I mean, they're going to have a problem overthrowing the oligarchy.
They might have a bit of an issue with my war on poverty because they believe in completely dismantling the state, which is exactly the opposite of what MLK wanted.
What do you think you're going to get if the libertarian is successful in getting rid of the state? Like, what do you think grows oligarchs?
He said he supports gay rights, so I saw it.
It is literally neoliberalism, which is libertarian economic thought that gets you oligarchs. It is the way. It is that money begets money.
I'm just waiting for him to put up the photoshopped graphic about how MLK was actually anti-vaccine and how that was the true tyranny that was keeping whites and blacks apart.
I just like to
and then fire another producer.
I just like to say, as somebody who comes from the white working class, fuck Jimmy Dore for putting the Boogaloo Boys as the icon of the white working class. Fuck him forever for that.
Unbelievable. Really is amazing.
Well, if you don't have like if you're not a stock image person with like a hard hat and soot all over your face, you're not working class to Jimmy Dore. That's literally how myopic his perspective is.
If you're not Zoolander's family.
If you don't have the black lung pop, you're out.
Well, glad he found a little bit of MLK in himself to celebrate.
In a
that.
small way, I'm a bit like this guy.
The parallels are uncanny.
A little bit like Malcolm X too, if you think about it.
Oh yeah, didn't he already compare himself to Black Panthers? What's his name?
Fred Hampton, exactly.
Fred
That's
Hampton, yeah.
He
Did a whole thing on him.
Nazis.
Evelyn Gracias. I'm not saying that right, but Gracias. Avelino Gracias. My little brother and sister got COVID at school. At least classes are open while learning nothing because teachers are sick too. Isn't this the same administration that bemoans activists and insists nothing will fundamentally change, acting like no COVID, just vibes? Dan Crenshaw is such a tough guy, berating a 10-year-old for calling him out. Must have been blindsided. I haven't seen that. All right, let's, we got, okay, we'll read 10 of these and then we'll be out of here. Martin Orlando. If it seems like drastic change is needed to avoid a big loss by Dems in the midterms, why does it seem like the Biden administration is not resisting or leading the charge on some reform? Feels like we stopped after the COVID relief bill passed. I think they've just been incredibly incompetent. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see if they do any like executive orders, but I don't know. My guess would be not, because they seem to just defer to, I don't know what it is. Like, how can we mitigate people's anger at us as opposed to doing anything?
Yeah.
Penny from New Mexico. I never heard you talk about Working Families Party anymore. It seems like it's been since the leadership endorsed Warren. Why is that? If not, I'm curious as to why. They seem to be a young, diverse, and dynamic bunch. We have a growing Working Families Party in New Mexico. I mean, it has not been as a function of Warren, and I think to a certain extent they've changed their tactics, at least in New York. And I guess I was just much more conscious of them because of their New York work. But they're doing stuff in Connecticut and Pennsylvania, and in New Mexico and one or two other states, I think. In New York, sort of like they separated from the unions to some extent. And
unions dumped them, yeah.
And and part of that was a function of Cuomo, and they reoriented in some ways. But I still vote on the Working Families Party line in New York State. It's a fusion ballot, but there's some places where they're an actual distinct party, and they've had some success there. I think it's just been timing more than anything else. Bear at home too. I enjoyed the guest today. A little disappointed the fun half ignores everything she said today.
You guys talked about her a lot today.
Yeah, Sam cited her 40 different times.
Yeah.
I think the idea being that we're
still
Stinchfield. I'm not sure. I can't wait. Strappy Wappy. I can't wait to see the documentary.
Me too. We're working on it. We're gonna do some sort of
teasers. Any estimated release date?
No. But that's mainly because we're still filming some stuff. So we're gonna release some little mini videos, just to get people, because some of this stuff is happening so quickly. We want to get information out. But
really cool. Could use a right-wing Mandela take right here too. I know it. Stephen Crowder. Wow. Whites need to fight to protect their families. Black people need to be calm and wait for change because black people scare me. Everything scares me. Sam scares me. Yep. Congressional baseball fan. Which do we have a better chance of seeing in March? Spring training baseball or Sam's beard? Yeah, that's a good question. Swoletariat. My daughter tested positive for COVID. Got a call from her school days later where she almost certainly got it, that there are cases at her school, but she wasn't a close contact. I'm at work because I'm still testing negative. We don't have sick leave anyway. It's awesome that we've given up as a society at managing this in any competent way. Will Omicron be the highest fatality variant despite being the least deadly?
I mean, we're at 2,000 deaths a day right now. And yeah.
I think it's quite possible. Left is best. Hang in there. I mean, it's insanity. My border collie named Sam. When my daughter and I visit Brooklyn, is there a section of local retail businesses anywhere?
I mean, you could go on Atlantic Avenue.
Well, it depends on which part of Brooklyn you're in.
Cobble Hill.
It depends on which part of Brooklyn you're in, right? I mean,
yeah.
Fifth Avenue in South Brooklyn. You could go to Sunset Park, Williamsburg. You could go down to the Navy Yards or Industry City, I guess. I mean, really everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think but in terms of retail, there are some, I don't know how old your daughter is, but there's some trendy shops on Atlantic Avenue and in
where? Like up in Fort Greene?
No, down in or is it Atlantic? Damn it.
And on Court too.
Court Street. Yeah.
Yeah, Court Street. But no, there's. All right, never mind.
I don't know where anything trendy is. Teachers, Czech Republic. I just love the new character, Jihadist MLK. I can imagine Michael is enjoying that. All right, 2 more.
You don't need to learn how to land.
Jesus. J-Man Raps. Hey, guys, what do you think about the Georgia Attorney General potentially charging Trump for interfering in the election? Also, Lindsey Graham could be caught up in that. I doubt any Democratic Attorney General has the guts to really go after Trump, but who knows? Great shows last week, Nomiki. We can balance calling out China and avoiding Cold War narratives.
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't know about the Georgia Attorney General. We'll see. I'm skeptical about everything right now. Bone ivermectin. The Democrats have no values. That's why they can't be truly pragmatic. If the Republicans set the stage in the first place, pragmatism is just laziness at best. For the voters? No, I don't think that's...
For the voters or for the people in power?
I think they're responding to the guest, maybe saying that in red states, blue Democrats are trained to have less sense of what is possible.
Yeah.
Prairie Fire Kowalski, Sam, Emma, Nomi, MR crew. Last weekend was supposed to be the big live. Turns out it was the big lie. Just kidding. Still ended up going to Boston with my friends because we had made a whole trip out of it and aren't afraid of needles and papers. So a Nebraskan, a Minnesotan, and a Florida man walk into the Garden and get to watch the Bruins win in overtime. Then we return a few hours later, watch the Celtics win a nail-biter, finish at the Garden.
Wow.
Being big Boston sports fans, this was a dream come true for us. I had no idea. Friday and Saturday, the place was as cold as the surface of Mars. But on Sunday, we went to Fenway Park for a tour. It was fairly pleasant. And even though you had to show your Vax card everywhere, it really wasn't an inconvenience like showing a license to get into a bar. Common sense. Needless to say, Boston might be the best place I've ever visited. The amount of joy and happiness that my friends and I had while we were there will be a cherished memory for a very long time. It would not have happened without this program. Obviously, I wish the live show had happened, but given the risk, I understand the call. Lastly, I got to say the dating apps there. Apparently, the ladies really like 6'5", blonde hair, piercing, blue-eyed, in-shape, gym-going man in his late 20s. I see why Matt is never coming back to the prairie.
Oh, wow. Flex on him, Kowalski.
Leftist poggers. That's awesome.
That's funny.
That's awesome.
Kowalski's so happy he got to say his height in an IM.
There we go. That's definitely like what they call a thirst trap, right?
I mean, yeah.
Big drink of water.
I know I have girlfriends that are very heightist. They're like, this is my cutoff.
Oh my gosh. They put in the bio. I mean, I haven't been on a dating app in a long time, but it's like nothing under 6 foot. I mean,
I thought that was ridiculous when I was on those apps. I mean, I never did that.
I'd say 50%, at least maybe more, women put a height minimum on their dating app, and often it's 6 foot.
But that's crazy.
They're tall women, maybe?
Is that? No, it's not
They say they want to wear heels.
I'm a tall woman, right? But I hate heels. I'm 5'8", 5'9". I never had a fucker. I mean, not bragging about that, but that's just I feel that's weird that women feel comfortable just being like that. But whatever.
I'm
some women.
Are you a neoliberal? Are you a Trumpster? That's the obvious one.
That's my one thing is I use only liberal people, but. Sam, you don't do that.
Exclusively want to date Trump supporters.
You just want to debate.
I just like to get into arguments.
Sam does not, like, I asked him the other day, I was like, why don't you just, cut it off? If they don't identify as progressive or liberal, you shouldn't go out. And he was like, well, I like debating. My dates.
An argument.
It's like steamy and weird.
No, it's just I like to argue.
Oh, like, so the date ends. You just want to sit there, have a debate with them on the date, and then you don't call them back, or does it feed into something?
Make out after like arguing about Newt Gingrich?
Yeah, no.
Would you be in a relationship with a Trumpster?
No, no. I mean, I don't even get to the date part. I've had different people disconnect with me and go like, "You're a soy boy."
Like, what are you doing in New York, lady?
And the final I am of the day. Trashweed. Conservatives like Crowder turning on MLK is a sign they're getting scared of his real, non-watered down message becoming more well known. And I'd bet money that within a decade, the Republicans will attempt to undo MLK Day as a holiday.
Great point.
Yeah.
Our guest mentioned John McCain. John McCain was one of the last holdouts for MLK Day as a holiday. I don't know if people remember that. Matt, Bradley, Emma, Naomi, great job today. See you folks tomorrow.
Bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there.